And we have a terrific panel to get us started this morning, an ideal combination of practitioners and researchers to discuss the opportunities and limitations facing states and districts in overcoming those tensions and building those cohesive leadership systems that we've been talking about. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to join me on the panel as I briefly introduce them. I'm going to commend to you their more fulsome biographies that are in your conference materials because I'm going to be very brief in the introduction, and they have accomplished more and deserve much more of an introduction than I'm about to give them. So please go read about them in your materials. And I would ask that you please hold your applause until all of the panelists are seated at the table. First, representing the voice of state leadership, I am absolutely thrilled and honored and delighted to welcome the Honorable Jack A. Markell, Governor of Delaware. The governor has led an ambitious statewide education reform agenda just this summer. He signed into law 3 major education reform bills that improve academic testing to measure student progress over a school year, that rewards high-performing schools with additional funding, and that provides districts and schools with much more needed discretion to make financial and other decisions that meet the needs of the students they serve. On the research front, I'm delighted to welcome an old friend, Dr. Michael Knapp, who's the Professor of Education, Leadership, and Policy Studies at the University of Washington and the Director of its Center of Teaching and Policy. Wallace first commissioned Mike and his team back in 2001, when we were long on questions and short on answers, to help us frame how school leaders actually connect their daily work to better teaching and learning. The resulting publication, Leading for Learning, Reflective Tools for Schools and District Leaders, which was published in 2003 and is still a bestseller on our download list, began a journey of exploration for us together that will culminate in a series of reports soon to be published, and that will continue to shed light on the meaning and the forms of learning-based leadership in schools and districts and in state systems. And rounding out the panel, we are really privileged to have 2 distinguished district leaders. Wendy Robinson, who is the superintendent of Fort Wayne Community Schools in Indiana since 2003. She's a veteran educator, having served over the past 3 decades as teacher, principal, and central office administrator. The woman has actually done it all. Wendy was one of the inaugural Broad Center Fellows and one of the first superintendents we worked with when we began our work in leadership. She too helped us figure out some of the answers we didn't know. She is a sought-after speaker and has presented at conferences hosted by the National Conference of State Legislatures, the American Association of School Administrators, and the Urban Superintendents Association. And last but certainly not least, Jerry Weast is the superintendent of Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland, the largest and most diverse school system in Maryland and the 16th largest district in the nation. For the past 10 years, he has been directing a courageous and ambitious comprehensive reform effort designed to raise academic standards and narrow the achievement gap for the more than 140,000 students in his district. His work is the subject of a wonderful new book, Leading for Equity, The Pursuit of Excellence in Montgomery County Public Schools, that was published just this year by Harvard Education Press, and it chronicles the district's success in closing the achievement book. It's a book I heartily recommend. It's an easy read for a Harvard publication. It's an easy read. And it really tells the incredible story of Dr. Weist, who told me over breakfast that he began and continues to be a teacher, and he just happens to have been on special assignment for the last 35 years. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. Thanks. I'm going to start to get our conversation going. I know I don't have to work too hard with this group, by asking a few questions. But I'm going to keep a close eye on the time and turn it over to you to make sure that you have a chance to answer questions, ask questions of the panelists, or maybe answer some of their questions as well. We have a lot of wisdom in this room. So be thinking of what you really wanted to know, or questions you have, or comments you want to ask. as you hear some of the introductory conversations, so that when we turn it back to you, you'll have your questions at the ready. There are mics at different points in the room, so don't be shy. Go for it. So let me start with Governor Markell. And you know, Governor, as I said in my remarks, historically there's been a little skepticism about what state leaders really can do to affect, the lives of principals in schools and school districts. But research has confirmed that actually state policies do make a difference, and that Delaware, who's been a long-time partner with us in this work, has also taught us a lot, is probably one of our rock stars in terms of the progress that you have made from the state to the district to the school level. And I wondered if you could kind of talk a little bit about what do you think you did that really worked? What would you advise people not to do that maybe didn't work so well? And as you think about the future, how are you thinking about propelling the work, and where are you going next?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's great to be here. I want to thank the Wallace Foundation for their remarkable support over many years and for pulling together all of these thinkers and practitioners today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel. I also want to thank, we've got a great delegation here from Delaware. I thank many of them for getting up early so they could sit right in the front, so I'd have friendly faces to look at. But including...
They're all friendly here.
They're all friendly, that's good. Including two of our legislators, the chair of our Senate Education Committee, Dave Cicola, and the chair of our House Education Committee, Terry Schooley, our Secretary of Education, superintendents and principals, and many others. So first of all, I think we've got to be thoughtful. We've got to be thoughtful about it. We've really got to understand that there's not one single thing. But, and I'm not a big fan of the word system generally, but in this case, I think actually having a system that's integrated and coherent is very, very important. So for us, it really started and starts with the development of standards that everybody can sign on to and that everybody understands that this is how we're going to be measuring ourselves, this is how we're going to be measuring leaders. But standards alone doesn't get it done. Beyond standards, we've got to make sure that we are linking those standards to our institutions of higher education and into our leadership development program. We've got to make sure we're doing a really good job of identifying talent out in the schools for potential leaders. It means we've got to do good succession planning in terms of, again, working with our superintendents, with our principals to identify teachers who down the road may want to move into principal positions. It also means giving them an opportunity to lead as teachers. And this is something our Secretary of Education, Lillian Lowry, who is here with me today, she and I visit many, many schools. And one of the things that we hear consistently, over and over again from teachers, believe it or not, is about the importance of good leadership. Now, they have a very particular focus on what that means, and it's really about having these professional learning communities. And I don't mean that in one particular approach or another. I was with Susan Bunting of the Indian River School District, who's also with us here today. We were at a school earlier this week, Long Neck Elementary. And in that school, the teachers talked about the collaborative working environment they have, the opportunities that they have to work with their colleagues, with their principals, to talk about students, to talk about different approaches, but also to take leadership opportunities to prove what they can do. And then how do we nurture these folks in the schools who actually may want to become teachers down the road? So it's really about having all of this fit together in some kind of coherent fashion. In terms of what to avoid, what generally we've discovered the biggest problems are when the districts really don't clearly define the roles, the responsibilities, the expectations of the leaders and the potential leaders in their schools. And again, we have to have all of these different things aligned. If you have good standards, but you don't have a good plan for identifying talent, for nurturing talent, for developing the talent, for assessing the talent, then the standards themselves won't do any good. So it's really about thinking thoughtfully from the beginning. You've got all these different components, and all these components have to be aligned.
Thank you, Governor. He makes it sound so easy, right? But I know that all of our panelists have been thinking about this and working in their various positions on state policy. And I wonder if I could just ask each of them to say a little word about how they're thinking about it in their states and how they see it playing out in their districts. And Wendy, maybe I could ask you to start.
Thank you for that opportunity.
You always call on the really smart girls in class first.
Listening to the Secretary talk last night, I think it's critical that all of us in the room think about how we're going to be not just consistent and cohesive in each of the states, but across the country. Because I think that one of the advantages of being with Wallace is learning that we spend a lot of time sometimes reinventing wheels that our colleagues have already been there and done that and have research on what works and what doesn't. I think the race to the top conversation is helping us in the state of Indiana, and I'm proud our state school superintendent, Tony Bennett's here with us today, give a guideline for what we really need to talk about. And I don't think we've been consistent in the state of Indiana having that alignment with states and districts. But I think those 4 areas of standards and assessment, consistent data systems, the teacher quality, and for us in Fort Wayne right now, the concept of how you turn around and what support you put in place for low-performing schools. Those are the kind of 4 criteria that a national conversation is formed around. And in Indiana, we have to commit to making sure that we have the systems in place to get those conversations cemented in Indiana. So right now for us, the low-performing schools requires the first 3. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is where the conversation needs to center.
Great, great, thank you. Jerry or Mike, do you have any perspective you'd like to add on the state-district connection?
Probably don't have a whole lot to add, other than I just find it kind of interesting that we can agree the hookup for a fire hose ought to be the same all across the country so we can interchange fire hoses. And when I buy my size 11.5 shoes, they're the same wherever I go in the country. But between the states and between the districts, there's a lot of difference on what we agree about should be the outcome. And I think a little bit more of a look at standardization might be helpful, even if it's a voluntary look. We're one of the only industrialized countries in the world that have no standards for our outcomes. So consequently, I think we might be going 14,000 different places in 50 different ways. And so I think that if we really want a school system rather than a system of schools, there are some ways we can bring about this coherence and maybe do it a little faster. I'm a big supporter of Arnie Duncan and what he's trying to do with the federal government. I hope we all join that.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. So you're a big proponent of common standards.
Well, what I don't want is right now we have variation of outcomes. And we have variation of expectations. And that variability, I think, is hurting our country because when I graduated from college in the 60s, we were graduating about less than 30% of the country from college. And now that I'm on 2009, we're still less than 30% of the country graduated from college. It's kind of interesting how that hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. And when I go to China, I find more children in Chinese speak English than we have numbers of kids in school. Same thing I found in India. So maybe we could bring a little more coherence if we had some standards.
Terrific, thank you. Mike, you've been in lots of school districts all around this country. What's your perspective on the state district role?
One of the things, a lot of the research that I talk from know best, and I'm only one researcher voice of many, and you've cited some others who do different kinds of research, but in the research that I've been part of and my colleagues have been part of, very much focused on inside schools and also in districts, is that what's going on at the state level, which may seem a long way away, and perhaps 2 decades ago was much longer away, is actually very present in some important ways. You find the state's learning standards, not necessarily the same across states, but you find those always on people's mind. I mean, they are part of the conversation as it unfolds. And when Arnie talks about various kinds of things, he would like to coalesce conversation around. States are already doing that, and the federal government can also play that role. They can convene conversation in some very big picture ways, and nobody operates now without thinking daily about the accountability system in which they're part of, and that's a federal, state, and local, and there are different variations there. But these are big things in people's lives, and so we need to do them well.
Thank you. So far, we've been talking about the state role, which is one very important actor. And I want to kind of shift our attention a little bit, while I still have the floor, to the district role. And Jerry, if I can ask you again, you know, the Washington Post recently published a really fabulous story that gave you a lot of credit for the work over the past decade in Montgomery County, and said that, you know, few superintendents had made as much progress as you had in closing the achievement gap. And I wondered, you know, from your seat on special assignment from your classroom teaching days, what were the most important steps that you took as a superintendent that have kind of helped you make the progress we've seen in Montgomery County?
Well, first of all, I get a lot of credit that I don't deserve. And so just discount the Washington Post. I do appreciate, though, that it is all about good people. The people you have working in your system and workforce excellence is probably your #1 issue. Over the last 35 years, I've kind of taken to developing a template about how to go about this. I've had an opportunity to merge some school systems down North Carolina, to build new systems that weren't there, and to work in Montgomery County for, this is my 11th year. I think you first have to start out with the expectations. Most systems are systems of schools rather than a school system, and so I appreciate what the governor was saying is how to make a coherent school system. We all have to have the same goal, the same outcome. And when you really get down and talk with the community, what we decided we wanted is children college and high-wage work ready. That was the common factor. We wanted all of our children to graduate, and certainly to graduate meeting the state requirements and the local requirements, but that's different than college ready. We need to recognize that in this country. College ready is a much, much higher standard. So we set about to get 80% of our children college ready, no remediation, by 2014. When you do that, then you can start lining up your systems. But before you start lining up your systems, you have to take a look at the conditions. What we decided that we had even inputs with uneven results. We were a system that demographically were changing. We increased in the last 10 years 100% on children who do not speak English, 80% on children who come in with different racial characteristics. We went from majority white to 38% white in the last 10 years. But what we did do is start to, once we looked at our conditions, we found out the biggest condition that we had that had the variability was the workforce excellence, both at the principal level and the teacher level. And so you have to build the third thing, the structures, to build a new culture to change that all around. We found out that our evaluation structure was wrong. We found out that our employment structure was wrong. We found out that our curriculum was a mile wide and an inch deep and couldn't be accomplished. We found out a whole lot of things about our processes that weren't aligned to this outcome of getting kids college ready. And so you get into the fourth area, and that is how in the world do you build those support structures to change that culture, and then how do you monitor it? Oversight and overseeing are two different things. And support versus gotcha are two different methodologies. One will get you compliance, the other one will get you commitment. And so we had to unleash the innovation, which is the final way. And you do that by developing structures of collaboration, working across and blurring the lines of leadership. differentiating your inputs. We actually put a whole lot more money and effort where we have the highest concentration of poverty and mobility. Doing the things that make sense to teachers, and they want a good principal in every building that is an instructional leader. And we had to retrain that. And we had to triple our investment in training our principals and training our teachers, and it couldn't be one shot. It had to be over a period of time, and we had to give them the support. And if you do that, you can make a coherent system, do away with some of your variability, and then we keep track of our children all the way through graduation from college to see if the juice was worth the squeeze.
Thank you. You know, Wendy, I'm struck by listening to Jerry talk about the importance of the human capital equation, the teachers and the principals. And I know that you have been an innovator in Fort Wayne about changing the way in which your principals are trained to specifically help them work in some of your toughest environments. I wonder if you could talk for a minute or two about what you've done there.
I'm just struck by listening to Jerry, who's been doing this 35 years, and I've been doing it 7.
You're smarter than I am.
How the challenges are the same, but the last statement about the human capital is where we all have to understand that we as superintendents have very little power if we don't hire the right people. But over the years, the absolute connection between the student and the teacher becomes more and more critical to what a superintendent has to focus on. We have to put systems in place, but the ultimate system is, are they reading yet? And the teacher is the only one who's going to impact that. We have used our Wallace funding to cement having a quality pool. Fort Wayne doesn't have a beach, we don't have mountains, and most people don't understand that we're in the state of Indiana because we're not near Indianapolis. So what we have to make sure is that when people come to our system, that we get quality people, and we found the first place to do that is to hire quality teachers and begin them understanding that leadership is not just the principal, that teachers are leaders, and then figuring out for them what it is we absolutely have to have them do. What is it they have to perfect? We, as a part of our leadership training, look at what people do as teachers because we believe if they don't understand that relationship, it's impossible for them to have strong administrative skills. Once you train them, once you understand the expectations, and Jerry said that too, what is it we're trying to get done? The use of data, the supports that the central office has to have for training a young principal. What I've learned over the last 7 years, and it's become one of those aha moments, we've spent a lot of time training. We spent a lot of time the first 2 or 3 years, and then we almost slacked off, and we backed away, and we think that we've done all of this professional development, and they ought to be good to go. The video last night shows the absolute stress on principals, and one of the things we have to do as superintendents is to constantly assess the environment and the conditions to make absolutely certain that we are putting supports in place every single day, like data systems, additional people. We don't have SAMs, but we've instituted instructional coaches. We've instituted interventionists. We've looked at quality improvement teams, which is a combination of teachers and principals looking at data and analyzing how to improve instruction. And so I think as a part of our work, it's absolutely critical to get the right people to start with, to provide them with the skills that you want them to have, and you know they need to be an urban principal. But then the other part is to surround them with a team. I think we forget sometimes that principals have to have a support system, and that's really been the focus of the last couple of years of our Wallace work. What does that support system look like? And I think the last thing on that level, we actually have principals who stay in it 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. And what we're finding is that you almost have to look at a 30-year veteran principal the same way you do a first-year principal, because our environment's changing so rapidly that the systems we put in place for a principal even 5 years ago aren't really providing them with the support system. Notice I didn't say skills. I didn't say knowledge. I said support systems that allow them to do what we hire them to do.
Thank you. It's a really interesting insight about the differentiation of supports that through a continuum of one's career. And Mike, I'm struck as I listened to Jerry and Wendy and reflect on the film last night about what we can really do about teaching and supporting people in these very difficult jobs. And I'm wondering from your perspective as you look at things across the country, do we know what we're doing? Are our programs tooled up to help people with the skills and provide the supports that our teachers and our leaders now need?
Do we know? We're learning, I think is the best way to put it. We are learning what the support systems need to look like, and I just want to underscore that term that both Jerry and Wendy used. And by the way, my own research has never been in either of their districts. Researchers always prick up their ears when what you hear from someplace you've never studied converges with things that you've heard in places you have studied, and they absolutely converge. They're underscoring for you something that you would not have seen in the movie last night, which was the principal story. Focused on the principal, very dramatically telling a very important thing about what principals are. The next movie Wallace will put out is the principal support system story. I'm afraid it doesn't quite have that ring. Maybe the dramatic contour across a year might not be there because it's more than a year's worth of telling. But I'll leave that to the cinematographers and to Wallace to figure out how to do. There's another movie that needs to be made, and that's the teacher leadership story. And you heard that also happening both in Montgomery County and Fort Wayne, that they see teachers as exercising leadership, potential leaders, not necessarily all headed into a principal pipeline, some yes, some into this, what we call, and are increasingly calling, the instructional leadership cadre, which operates within schools and across schools. And we're seeing that in a variety of different districts, and it takes different forms. There's not just one way to do this, but the ways you heard in these two cases are among the ones that we've seen elsewhere, and that they typically involve bringing people together around data. And it's not necessarily just the test data, the assessment data. That's an important part of it. It's all kinds of data, and along with the data are questions. So people are coming together trying to ask a question of the data. What does it say? What do we need to know? What's going next? I think, Wendy, you may want to say a little bit more about some of the data questions you like to have people ask. Once again, not something I've studied, but very similar to things that we've been learning. And bringing people around and convening the conversations and understanding at all levels that whoever is exercising leadership, and it's often teams, they need a support system too. So you start asking, what form does that take? And there's a lot of good examples out there now that we are learning from. And so we're getting there. I don't think we're there yet.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Governor, I want to come back up to the state level. We've kind of, and sort of ask as you think and listen to Mike and Wendy and Jerry, are there specific things that strike you that a state could do to help in some of these realms that we've just been talking about?
Well, first of all, I thought the answers given by my fellow panelists were outstanding, and I took very careful notes. And from a governor's perspective, I think there are really two ways of answering the question. The first is a little bit technical, and there are certainly some specific technical steps that we can take. We can foster collaboration, for example, between local districts and our institutions of higher education. And I'm grateful today both University of Delaware and Delaware State University are represented here, and I think that is more than symbolic, but the fact that they are engaged with us coming to DC and sort of engaged in Delaware, working with our local education associations are really important with the local districts. Beyond that, we can provide, as a state, we can provide technical assistance to districts regarding how to develop a succession plan and what components that should include. And I think all of that's very valuable. But I also think it goes well beyond that. It goes beyond the technical and it goes to the cultural. And this is really what I heard from my panelists about the importance of everybody understanding that this is, in fact, about part of the culture. And how do we approach these educational challenges in general? Do we have adult-centered systems? Or do we have child-centered systems? And one of the things that I heard from Jerry is, always having the focus on the kid. And we can have, and this is always, I think, to me, sort of the challenge of talking about educational policy, because we can all agree on what the recommendations look like on paper, what the steps look like. We can have that intellectual discussion. But then it's so different when you go into the schools and you sit down with the teachers and the other school-based personnel and with the principals. And you try to get a sense of how things are really working in those schools. And one of the things, again, that I talk about pretty much every time I'm with teachers, it does have to do with what kind of working environment exists within the school, what kind of relationship exists between the school leader and the teachers. And to me, that's incredibly important. And from a state standpoint, you mentioned in your introduction that one of the pieces of legislation that I signed, sponsored by Senator Sokola and Representative Schooley, was to push more of the decision-making, more of the discretion about schools, about kids, closer to kids. And even though I have an absolutely terrific Secretary of Education in Lillian Lowry and a great team at the Department of Education, we all agree that the best decisions about kids are not made from an office building in Dover. And I thought what you referred to in your introduction, the conflict between stay out of my way and follow the rules, I thought that was actually quite telling. And from the perspective, it's clear if you believe, and I think everybody who's connected to kids believes, that the best decisions about kids are made by those closest to the kids, then all of us at the state level have got to migrate to the mode of being supportive of what's going on at the districts, rather than getting in the gotcha game that was referred to. So I think there's some technical things the state can do, but I also think that people in the schools have to understand that culturally, this is where the state's coming from.
It's really smart, thank you. Mike, yeah, sure.
I want to just add something to that Governor Markell has put a finger on the stay out of the way versus follow the rules tension in the state to district relationship. A parallel exists in the district, between the district and the schools. And one thing we're learning from looking closely is how fundamentally districts need to rethink and re-engage the relationship between the central office itself and schools. And that takes you beyond the org chart. So you're not just going to put new structures in place. That's a start, that's a shell in which things happen. But it actually gets you right down inside work practices. What do people actually do? What do these good people that you get do in relation to one another? And so we're beginning to see some nice examples of what it might mean to get way beyond stay out of my way. Yes, give some more autonomy to principals, at the same time engage the principals rather continuously in questions about what does it mean to be an instruction leader? What does it mean to act to make things happen? And here I am. Here we are together in this enterprise.
Right. Jerry, I know you want to add something, and then Wendy, I know, wants to jump in. We've hit a hot topic, I think.
Have you ever wondered when you see a beginning teacher coming in and what they really think and really feel? And how about students when they come, when they're little kids and come with this idea of opportunity? And then they go into our structures, and before long, after about 5 years, about half of those teachers have dropped out. And when you take a look at the graduation rates in our country, they're pretty abysmal, especially when